Welcome back, my friends. This is Flash Fiction, and I am your host, Taylor Doty. Team, you want to introduce yourselves?
I will be one of the commentary guests as Patrick Miller. I love reading and writing, and I love talking about poetry as well as fiction, and I love talking about favorite lines in the prose and pieces that we're going to be talking about, so you'll hear me say that line a lot, so get used to it, guys.
I'm Shawn Van Aller, and I'll be another commentary here. I really like lyrical lines and anything written, rhymes, whether it's rap, pop, hip-hop, rock, though I prefer rock. If you got something new and you want to share it, I'm more than interested to hear it and just give you some feedback on it.
Yeah, I am the host, little brother, Brandon Doty, so I'll be another commentator.
That, and we also have another commentator who might join us later, a good friend, Aaron Diaz. And as always, we have our punctual producer is also involved, Mr. Arash Omari. But let's get into our first guest with Mr. Ryan Kirkpatrick.
Hello. It's good to be seen. It's good to be heard.
Yes.
Well, not seen, because this is radio. You know what I mean.
Yeah. So, anything you want to say before we start your story there, Ryan?
Not really. I don't really have anything pertinent to say. It's good to be on. It's good to bring Flash Fiction back. This state, now that we are no longer over the terrestrial airwaves. So it's good. It's a little nostalgic, you know?
Yes, it's
happy to be here.
Yeah. Alright. So you want to just jump right into your story? Huh?
Yeah, so this is something I've been working on for about a year. Intermittently, so to speak, you know, I'll work on it for like a month at a time, or a week at a time, or a day at a time even, and then I'll pick it up, you know, 9 months and 4 weeks down the block, or something like that. Or I'll just like add a sentence here or there. It's one of those things. It's, you know, kind of just pleasure writing, not rhyme or reason, just doing it for the sake. But it's got no title. Doesn't even have too much of a plot. It's a working title at the moment. It's called The Travelers. And I mean, it's about traveling to some degree, so I guess, yeah. Quiet static buzzed from the car radio. He adjusted the dial, going from station to station, going nowhere. Occasionally between the hissing and pops were inaudible words, only understood to whomever was behind the microphone. His fingers twisted the dial once again, searching for some suitable background noise to accompany him throughout his journey down the unswerving state route. Finally, an AM station came through. And I asked my flock, what can one do without the love of the Lord? They speak not a word, for they know the true answer. Nothing can be accomplished without his presence in your life. You can certainly try, as we all know somebody fearful of accepting his grace. But do they succeed? Never. With the palm of his hand, the man pushed the button to the radio inwards, relegating the sedan's cabin to near silence. Only the light breathing of his companion heard from the back seat. They had been driving for close to 11 hours now, and the man behind the steering wheel was growing tiresome of their less than ardent trek cross-country. Midwest was morose of anything worthwhile, Iowa especially. Through his high beams, he could make out cornfields, alfalfa fields, sorghum fields, and more cornfields. Nothing else. Land was alien, and he thought to himself that he felt like a tribesman from Papua New Guinea, dropped straight into Times Square. This whole part of the nation was foreign to him. He never ventured more than 50 miles west of the eastern seaboard. In a way, it was anxiety-provoking being so far from home. He kept his glance to Route 169 and its passing fields. In the opposite lane, a tractor-trailer approached. Even the first vehicle was seen in close to half an hour during its sojourn down the blackened road. The man put on his low beams, and the 18-wheeler passed, taking the carriage of the car. Looking on his high beams once again, he looked into the back seat. He was still asleep, wisps of her auburn hair covering her eyes. The breaths of eliciting from her body raised her chest ever so slightly before falling back once more, repeating the process over and over again. It was deep in the dreamscape of her silence in the cabin is deafening even. Hearing nothing, you somehow begin to hear everything. The slight rattle of the pack of gum in the glove box, your heartbeat, the sloshes of your last meal digesting. Dan was growing distressed by this silence as it grew. With that, his thoughts began to run wild. This wasn't a good idea. Why are we going here? If we turn back now, we can be in Chicago by breakfast time. With his left hand on the wheel, he began to search for the center console, glancing every few seconds to turn. Well, it wouldn't have made a difference if he had stopped looking at the road altogether. There was nothing to hit, and if he went off the road, he'd just end up in a field. No harm, no foul. Regardless, he kept alternating his gaze between the road and the apartment, his fingers searching for something. He tumbled over receipts from gas stations and empty plastic before finding a sleeve. There we go, he muttered quietly. He took some pressure off the gas pedal, slowing down by about 20 miles per hour or so. The man then took his left hand away from the wheel, pulled the disc out of the sleeve, and loaded it into the car stereo. The sickening green-colored light of the radio came on, and music quietly began from the speaker. The song was a soft indie tune from a sketchy MP3 site back when he was a teenager. He didn't remember the artist or the name, not that it'd make a difference anyhow. His favorite words that floated across the radio's display was track 1. "Billion particles between us," crooned the singer sadly. And sighed, eyes locked on the center line that separated the lanes of the highway. Jangly, down-tuned guitars filled the cockpit of the Toyota spacecraft, flying through the alien the roads of northern Humboldt County, Iowa. The music was depressive, yet still retained a quality that would make it suitable for a lullaby. Eyes began to grow heavier than they already were. He moved his hand to the stereo once more, hoping that track 2 would provide more in the way of lucidness. Before he could skip the song, however, a loud thud echoed throughout the vehicle. He failed to notice the large pothole sitting in the middle of the road. "Ah, fuck," he exclaimed in yet reserved tone. The man was trying to be as quiet as possible, hoping not to disturb the girl behind him. His effort was futile, however, yet his expression of dismay towards the local highway department or the pothole itself, she awoke with a groan. "Did we hit something, Ben?" she asked groggily. Hands moved the long strands of hair away from her eyes before rubbing them. "It's a pothole. Go back to sleep, hon," Ben said without even... "I'm awake," the woman yawned. "How much longer until we get there? You're driving forever now." Ben let out a small yawn before turning to the back seat and giving a small smile. "Not much longer, maybe an hour or so." I saw a sign about 5 minutes back that said we're almost to the county line with Pursuit. He said on the radio back at the motel, or back on the hotel, once we get to Algonquin, about 25 miles west of it. The woman let out a sigh. "You sure this is worth it?" "No, but we've driven too far now to change our minds," he said sternly. The melancholic indie song started to fade out before launching track. Springsteen song from Nebraska. He couldn't remember what particular song it was, but it was fitting to the desolation that stood before them. He remembered making the CD back in junior year of high school, back before life went to ruin. It was after Catherine Regis had broken up with him at the game against Rock River. Somehow it had managed to remain in his car the past decade, full of the angst and sadness that permeated life back then, and a dilapidated green sign appeared in the headlights by the side of the highway. Pursuit County, Iowa, Algona 12 miles. The woman put her hand on Ben's shoulder. "When we get to town, can we stop and get something to eat?" she asked. "I'm pretty hungry." "Holly, it's 11:45 on a Tuesday night in rural Iowa. You seriously think there's going to be anything open at this hour?" "Well, maybe a diner or a bar or something, I don't know," she replied. Ben let out a small scoff. Maybe if somebody had gotten more to eat at the rest stop back in Gary other than a couple of Slim Jim, saying in a sarcastic tone, then they wouldn't be starving and eat Jesus nowhere. "Come on, Ben, I'm sorry," Holly said. "I just wasn't that hungry." And Ben shook his head. "I did not tell you that once we left the motel in Toledo that we wouldn't be stopping with the exception of restroom breaks?" Yes, I believe I did. Did you listen? I think not. We're making damn good time, and I don't want to be anything less than significantly early. Holly chose not to reply, instead staring out the car windows into the darkened fields that ran alongside the road. Truthfully, Ben wasn't mad, just a tad annoyed. He was anal about time to the point a psychiatrist might have diagnosed him with an anxiety disorder. Anything less than 20 minutes early to any event, be it a doctor's appointment or a barbecue, an acceptable prospect to him. In fact, Ben's time obsession was so great that during his collegiate days he'd skip class rather than face the possibility of running 30 seconds late and disturbing the class before it had even begun. Holly, Ben's complicated relationship with time manager Baxter. Her family always subscribed to the fashionably late idea of Ben. It was almost like a life or death scenario. Like in time management, defusing a bomb right before it detonated. The pair drove in silence for several more miles before Ben spoke. Listen, I think we're ahead of schedule here. Maybe if something is open at this hour, we can get something to eat. Sorry to have sounded like a dick earlier, he trailed off. It's fine, babe. No worries, Holly replied with her gaze focused on the passing fields. I hate to sound like a child. How much further is Algona? I don't know. Maybe a few more minutes? I hope something's open. I know why, but I wouldn't mind either. Said. Holly chuckled. See, I knew I was in the right, said in a jovial tone. And rubbed the back of Ben's neck. There's gotta be a McDonald's or something open out here. I'd like to think so, but this isn't Boston. I'd be surprised if there was even a gas station open at this time of night. At this point in time, the clock read 12:05. It was Wednesday. The two weren't due to reach their destination at a particular time, but Ben wanted to arrive at a timely set of pace. This was not a part of his time anxiety. Instead, it was more the fact of getting their trip over with. In their 1,000-mile journey, each minute held thoughts of uncertainty, thoughts of doubt. By prolonging this inevitability, Ben's anxiety would continue to grow in his chest. He simply wanted to mark his and Holly's arrival in order to end the panic. They continued on northbound. A few specks of light grew in the distance. Is this Algona? Holly asked. Algona, Ben replied, both simultaneously relieved and nervous. On their way into town, they passed house after house, the vast majority of them dark. A few had glowing television sets visible through the windows, but regardless of this fact, the landscape of Algona, Iowa was devoid of humanity. As they took a left turn into the downtown of the small city, if you could even call it that, they passed a closed shop after a closed shop, one after another. No lights here, with the exception of dim street lights at each corner. Lord, please tell me something here that's open, Holly muttered. The car continued down the road, seeing nothing more than darkness and the occasional work closed sign. Finally, towards the end of the street, laid a small commercial building with its lights still on. The car proceeded onwards. As they approached it, a sign reading Mel Diner stood beside the road. Ben placed his foot on the brake and took a left turn into the small parking lot. No turn signal? Holly chuckled. Ben let out a small laugh. What's gonna happen? Am I gonna get pulled over by a ghost? The sedan passed over the gravel of the parking lot, making a crunching sound before the car was placed into park by the front entrance of the small structure. It was your typical diner, likely a relic of the 1950s. He turned the key and opened the door before stepping out into the cool spring air. Besides a beat-up hatchback and an old Ford pickup truck, the diner seemed to be empty. You ready? He asked Holly. Holly opened the back door and stepped out of the can. Mind if I smoke a cigarette first? After all, it's likely going to be my last for a while. That was it.
Does anyone else have anything to start out with?
I would first like to ask Ryan the relationship between Ben and I'm blanking on her name.
Holly.
Yes. Now, would you say that is a healthy relationship? That's a ideal, healthy relationship between those two characters. Now, just based off of what you were saying, how the story was going, it seemed like it, but I don't want to be betrayed by my idea of a healthy, normal relationship.
I don't really know. I don't think I put enough thought into it. I haven't progressed to the point where it's been touched on further. The second chapter, which is still a work in progress, is from a whole nother perspective, not involving those two. So I can't really say that I've explored it, but I'd like to think that it's relatively healthy, but there's something going on. You know, it's not picture perfect, but it's not downright terrible either.
Right. I was picking up on that. That's why I was asking, and I think it was subtle, so it was like I didn't want to doubt that it was happening, but it was my interpretation, so I just wanted to clarify, and I think that was really cool that that kind of was in there. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I think that brings depth to the characters because that adds a level to their relationship, and a reader could try to, poke their head in and see what's going on between them two.
Right.
Absolutely. That was well done.
Thank you.
I got something for you there, Ryan.
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
So, I saw a little bit of myself in the mail for a second there when you were talking about, like, his obsession with time and wanting to be early to everything and not liking being even, like, 30 seconds late.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering what kind of inspired you to write that part. It kind of hits me curious as a person that you've lived with and seeming kind of familiar.
Well, that was actually more based on me, to be honest. Because when I started writing this, it was prior to me living with you, the spring of last year, so spring of 20. And I don't know, it's like just a very weird thing, and I've gotten a lot better with it. But if it's to the point like I'm going to be late for a class and I know I'm going to be like more than a minute late, I won't even show up to it because it's just like so anxiety provoking, and it's not a big deal. Like nobody cares. It's one thing if you walk in minutes late, but like a minute late, no one cares. But for whatever reason, it's like this hang up in my head, and I've gotten better with it. Like Sean, we both had class this semester. We ran late a couple of times.
Yeah.
Not by any long stretch of time, by like 3 minutes at the most. And, like, we still obviously showed up, but like that was just one of those things where I've definitely struggled with it. Like, I don't like to be late. I work full time as a security guard, and like most of my coworkers show up like right on the dot, if not 10 minutes late or whatever, and I get there 25 minutes early. Just cause. I don't know, it's just like a weird thing with time. So I guess I incorporated that into the story based on my own experiences.
Okay. Well, I thought that was very unique and something that really caught my attention, just hearing, because that's not something I hear in a lot of stuff, and I like it because it's different and it's engaging.
Or I just have a weird relationship with time.
You and me both, buddy. You and me both.
Hello, Aaron. Thank you for joining. You were the beep.
Yes, I was. Time is an unpleasant bitch.
It is.
Oh, good. Aaron, you're here.
We have the video on or no?
No, just audio.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ryan, he finished up his wonderful part of his story, and they were just talking about time because he added that into one of his characters, and it was kind of based off of, Ryan's interpretation on having to be on time, or rather being early. A quick question, if you mind, if I interject here.
And then I got a question.
I couldn't, I don't know how to word it. I guess I couldn't ignore the fact that the driving was, obviously a big part of the story. And you're talking about always getting somewhere early and whatnot. Do you feel like the driving part is a bigger metaphor of we're just always trying to get somewhere in life, whether it's metaphorically, happiness, peace, forgiveness, or more of a physical sense of we're always going to class, we're always going to work, we're always having to get home to the wife or the kids, well, not yet in our lives, but you know what I'm saying. So my long-winded point of saying is, did that have any bigger metaphorical sense, or was it just part of the scene, part of the story of
the actual physical act of driving it?
Right.
Honestly, I hate to disappoint, but no real metaphorical hidden meanings or anything like that. It's just driving a car. I mean, like, later on when I flesh this thing out, like, they're driving to something. Like, that has significance. Because, you know, you can't walk from Boston, Massachusetts to the middle of nowhere, Iowa with relative ease. Well, I mean, I guess I can see where you're coming from, because, like, there obviously is some sort of, like, uneasiness going on. Maybe not tension, but definitely some sort of trepidation. And I guess I can see where you're coming from with that interpretation of, you know, going somewhere and what that means is a metaphor for we're always, you know, moving somewhere in life. And
Yeah. And I know it's like trying not to make, you know, dig deep out something when it's just so simple right there. You know, the reason why I guess I brought that up is because as we were talking about the uneasiness a little bit of the characters, you know, I think there's so much we don't know is that I just can't help but overthink and try to pick a part of what we do know. So
Right.
I think it's very awesome to be like, what's going to happen next, or, you know, just rip apart everything. And I think that's kind of the whole point of the show, is not only just to hear great stories and, you know, just get to know people and hear what they have to say, but also to just talk about, you know, obviously what you wrote, what you written, and I think it's great to just try to figure things out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now I got a question, Ryan.
Yeah.
You said the second chapter you were still working on it, but you said it takes place from a different perspective. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so, I guess what I'm going for is I don't want this work, you know, whatever it is. I don't want to, like, call it a book, because I don't know if I'm going for that. Not even, like, a novella, or, you know, it's going to be whatever it is. There's no real plan. It's just, you know, writing for the sake of writing. If anything, it's a practice. It's exercise. But I don't want to be limited to a single perspective. Like, the story is going to be intertwined between these respective parties. So, you know, this first chapter we have Ben and Holly, and then in second one we have waitress Becky works at diner, and I mean, you'll see how, like, the stories between their inner. But it's just this waitress working late night at a diner, and she's talking to a customer that happens to already be there.
Alright. No, that makes sense.
So I got another question here for you, Ryan.
Yeah.
And this one's kind of a joke too, but I kind of got the feeling when you were writing that one part about the driving through the pothole, were you thinking about Buffalo?
Subconsciously, I think it slipped in the.
Yeah.
Buffalo.
I know that a couple times when driving we hit a couple of those, and just curious if that kind of was in the back of your mind and inspired you.
I mean, maybe not Buffalo proper. It's just, you know, like, growing up in upstate New York, where we have, like, such shitty winters, and the fact that our roads kind of suck because of said winters, especially, like, in the Syracuse area, like, if you're in, like, all the lake effect and everything.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just, like, growing up and always having potholes, you know, it's just something I'm so used to. So it's, like, one of the tropes in my own writing. Like, I'll include potholes. Because I guess that's just what I'm used to. It's, like, how I use, like, certain names for a lot of things. I'm trying to, like, just as, like, a general example, how I'm trying to distance myself from using certain names in, like, my works, whether it just be, like, stuff I'm writing or anything really, because I always go back to names I like, but you want to like keep this separate, for lack of a better, too much confusion. And not to get all Sopranos.
Oh boy.
But
Here we go again.
But this is actually something I was just reading about The Sopranos. So obviously we know, I'm sure everyone here in this show has watched an episode of television before at some point in their lives, I would imagine. Any television.
Oh yeah.
But the one thing is in a show, you almost never will see characters, or if they there might be a Tony and a Tony, but they're very there are huge distinctions between, But, the one thing with The Sopranos, they have some characters, there's 3 people with the name Pussy, not the name Pussy, but the nickname. You got Pussy Mangione, you got Pussy blah blah blah, and you got Big Pussy, Little Pussy. You got 17 different Tonys. You got Tony Soprano, Tony Blundetto. I don't really know where I'm going with this. It's just, I guess it's more on the topic of tropes. We can edit this in post. We can cut that all out.
Fix it in post.
Yeah, fix it in post, everything.
TVtropes.com.
That, honestly, TVtropes.com is probably the writer's best resource besides Thesaurus.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry, some of you haven't heard of Spark Notes.
Oh no.
Well, did you say Spark Notes?
Yeah.
Yeah, Spark Notes is also a good
Mm-hmm.
when I need to make sure I'm not totally ripping off an idea. Because do you ever think about that? How we think that there's all these original ideas, but pretty much everything's been done before, one way or another, and it's somebody has had to have written the exact same sentence as I have at one point or another. Maybe the context is different, but the exact same word usage, same structure. I don't know. Maybe that's looking into it.
Yeah, and Simpsons did events before they even happened, so you know what?
Here, you hold this.
Well, hey, can I borrow your homework? Sure, just change it up a bit.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah, 10 years before it
Insert
happened.
image of Deadpool and Deathstroke here.
Oh yeah.
Do you think that devalues our thoughts, or not devalues, but kind of hinders the meaning a bit, or does it bring us together? Because if 2 people have the same thought or similar thoughts, that we kind of bond over that. I mean, in a way, this show is happening because of that. We all enjoy writing and talking about it, so therefore, that's kind of an idea of, hey, let's do the show because we all like this one thing and kind of think about similar things.
I think that's actually a really interesting thought. I haven't really looked at it. It's part of it's homage, but at the same time, we bond with things that we like more. Just to give off an example, think of war movies in general. Almost all war movies, have the same premise. I mean, not necessarily the same premise in terms of plot, but the same premise in terms of the event, that there's some sort of conflict. But for whatever reason, regardless if it's something like Black Hawk Down, where it's, some soldiers getting rescued, versus, what is it, Hacksaw Ridge? Is that the one with the pacifists?
Yes.
I mean, they're 2 very different things, 2 conflicts that were 50 years apart from each other almost, but still, they're still war movies, and people bond over that. I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but it's not unique to just that. I mean, all ideas in general.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, I think just the very thought of ideas in general, people bonding over them, it's kind of cool. But I don't know if I wouldn't say I don't like thinking that we share similar ideas and that, every thought's not really original because someone else has thought it. I mean, that in a way, it's kind of true, but it's how you spin it. Basically,
Yeah.
I had an English professor who was like, everything becomes cliched, but if you could spin it in your own way, it's less cliche, or something along those lines.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, because, like, it's obviously pretty hard to, like, 100% of the time, like, have it be a direct copy unless you're actually looking at it, you know? There's always going to be little nuances where there is some shred of originality, whether it be, you know, setting, plot to a degree, even if it's, like, very similar to something else, there's still going to be some element of weakness.
Right. Definitely.
So, kind of jumping into what you guys are talking about here, you know, an idea might be very similar, but, you know, if you change, even, like, a little bit of a change up, you know, unless you really sit there and think about it, you might not even notice it sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I don't know who here might be familiar with the director James Gunn.
Yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes, so at the end of the second Guardians of the Galaxy, when they're fighting Star-Lord's dad, if you actually look at it, and you also look at the ending battle of Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed, which he also directed,
Classic.
they
Oh
are
my
actually
God.
very similar endings, where the whole rest of the main character's group is kind of disappearing into, like, the tar monster or, like, the earth, and they're saying words of wisdom to him to help him rescue the rest. And it's actually very similar, but you don't notice it unless you really, like, sit there and think about it.
You know, you actually bring up a really good point. Like, in that case, that might be, like, a director, like, trademark type of deal, but think about, like, authors that have, they basically do the same sort of works. Just the actions or how they frame things.
Most definitely. A good example of that is Rick Riordan. You know, a lot of his books have been about different mythologies. You know, he does, like, Percy Jackson, which is Greek, and then he has, like, the Kane series, it's Egypt, but it's along the same central idea.
Like, it is kind of interesting to look at. Just, like, I'm blanking because I feel like I'm on the spot. I'm trying to think of, like, an author that I know of that does something similar. Not necessarily in terms of, like, the plot or the setting, but, like, their own writing style, where they, like, kind of, you know, rely on the same type of trademarks. I don't necessarily want to say tropes, because when I think of tropes, I think of, like, a more of a broader cultural thing, something that we see that's been in media and repeated, but, like, more something that this author respectively does for their own kind of...
Right, it's like you're talking about something they specifically do that you don't really see maybe everyone do, but it's something that they kind of do repeatedly.
Yeah, like, it's pretty much unique to them. Like, just the way they structure a story or specific elements of conflict. Like, I'm trying to think... I guess... See, I kind of have an example, but I don't know if it would really qualify as an example because it's kind of reliant on setting. I'm thinking of Khaled Hosseini, who wrote... He's most famous for The Kite Runner, and he also wrote A Thousand Splendid Suns, and then there's another book of his that I'm blanking on the title of, but he grew up in Afghanistan. So he grew up in Afghanistan, I want to say, like, during the era of Taliban, when they actually government in the mid-90s. So that's a very central element to his books, and what we see in his work, the main, like, point of conflict, at least in The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns, is the rise of the actual Taliban. That somehow influences the direction of the plot and how things are to proceed in terms of conflict resolution, ending.
That's a very good point that you bring up there. Although I'm a little confused on, I would just say, what would be the main point of doing that in a way, I guess, if that makes sense at all.
Mind like elaborating on that a little more, like doing
so
like in terms of the trademark, or
like is that an issue really?
Sometimes authors literally can't come up with anything else, and they just rely on what they've used before, because this worked in the past.
Yeah, that's what I think it is. Like, it can be an issue. It can be
good old
Hanna
depending on other elements of the
story. It doesn't necessarily ruin something. In terms of Husseini, I don't want to say that's a trademark. It's more of an element to his plot because he's known about writing stories about Afghanistan because he is Afghan. But the Taliban obviously plays a very central role in creating conflict in the story. But then again, that's kind of what he's known for. Not necessarily as in some sort of lazy writing style. When I think of a trademark, I'm thinking of a specific more individual action, not so much a broad overarching one that totally affects the plot. So I guess I'm kind of going back and forth on I can see both sides of the issue. I don't know.
Well, the reason go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, and this might not be as fitting as I'm thinking, but couldn't writing about that also be argued as being just kind of culturalistic?
Elaborate.
Well, writing about one's home.
I mean, I think it depends because the thing is if I was to write a book marketed, or not even just a single book, but several books, marketed towards dominantly upper middle class Americans, writing about growing up in, relatively suburban upstate New York would not make the New York Times bestseller list because it's not very unique of an experience, and everyone in America knows what that is. They may not have lived it, but they know what that sort of experience is Whereas if you are from Afghanistan and you are writing a book about experiences in Afghanistan, experiences of people you knew in Afghanistan, even if they aren't directly your own experiences, but you're incorporating them somehow into the plot, and you're marketing that towards Americans who have a pretty unhealthy relationship with Afghanistan due to 20 years of our military involvement over there, and then kind of saying hey, these are normal people, and I'm telling a story about people I knew or people who are influenced by people I knew and their experience. I think it's a bit different.
I can see where you're coming from with that. Pat, you were going to say something before?
Yeah, I kind of lost it a little bit. I was actually going to say, do you think, and Ryan said it's not laziness or anything, the reason I'm going to ask this just to be objective, because I know this is helping me back as a writer. I don't know about any of you guys personally, but I can tell, Taylor loves writing what he knows. He says that a lot. So do I. But my question to Kirky and everyone is, do you think it holds you back personally sometimes when you stick with a certain genre, topic, the things that you know about and that you kind of, as we've been talking about, keep writing about in one way or another? I feel like it, for me personally, it has helped keep me stagnant, and kind of actually regress as a writer, because now I'm only writing about that. I don't write anything else. I don't branch out, and it's frustrating because it's a comfort zone, and to be successful, I feel like you need to branch out. You need to evolve and develop your skill as a writer. Now, obviously, with most of these writers that are published and that have widely successful franchises or books or genres, you can tell that, they don't really need to evolve. Of course, it would be helpful for them to, but I don't know, I just feel personally that it's helped hinder my ability as a writer.
I mean,
do you think that is... Oh, go on, Taylor.
I said the only problem is, honestly, is probably more the authenticity. It's how authentically can you speak upon the issue, I guess, for lack of a better word. I don't know, that's really all I had to say.
I think that's actually a very interesting point, because if you write about, like, something it's a lot easier. If I was to write about my experiences growing up, not necessarily, like, writing an autobiography, but incorporating those things, it would definitely be a lot easier than writing fantasy. And I don't write fantasy. I don't think I could write fantasy. But at the same time, like, if you just focus on the same thing, I don't think it's a lot of progression. Obviously, like, there is nothing wrong with feeling stagnant, because that's not really something you can help. I mean, that's just kind of like a general writer's block type. Except it's not even writer's block, it's just ideas block, I suppose. But, it is a good point, because, like, we want to stay in our comfort zones, but, like, we also want to get outside of them, but we don't want to get too outside of them. It's like, in relation to, like, fantasy, I don't think I could ever write fantasy. I'm not really, like, huge into fantasy. Like, I like a couple doses here and there, I like Lord of the Rings, I like the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, but, like, it's entry-level fantasy, for me personally. I can't get into very hardcore, reading the texts of some 8,000-year-old elf. I just, that's not my type of thing. All the power to those who it is, but I don't think I could ever write about that, because it would be impossible for me to know. So I think it's just trying to strike a particular balance. That's what you want as a...
Yeah, that's great advice. I definitely appreciate it from one writer to another.
Yeah, because, like, I try, like, when I do write, I don't like to call myself a writer, because it's very intermittent in what I do. I don't focus in on it as much as I know all of you do. I guess I'm more of a filthy casual, so to speak. But I try and, have different things here and there. I've done, like, slice of life in rural Wisconsin. I have this, which I guess is the same thing, rural Iowa, so same type of deal, but I've done stuff in relation to, general murder, mystery, who done it, why done it. I don't know, I just try and have, I know my comfort zone, and I try and exercise myself in that comfort zone, because I know I'm alright with it, but, like, I like to push the boundaries a little bit with it. Honestly, most of my ideas, they just come as random thoughts in my head throughout the day. So that's where I go off of.
Gotcha.
Well, kind of in response to what you were saying there, Pat, about, whether or not that kind of, like, limitations are being a bad thing. I would say that they're definitely not, but at the same time, I think a lot of it also can depend on the kind of medium, because, you get people, like a lot of music artists, that they start out with one type of genre, and, the fan base has grown to just know them for that and enjoy it like that, and then, later on the artist wants to swap it up and change it, and the fan base doesn't always agree with that. Sometimes sometimes there's a bit of expectancy that people have just come to gain. And as like another example, I'm sure you're more than familiar with Stephen King. Well, I mean, Stephen King's always written horror, and if there's kind of like a self-expression of who you are, and it shows in the work that you do. Just kind of, if he were to suddenly swap up and write something like a love story, that might really throw people off, and frankly, that could end up being scarier than some of his other writing.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a very good point. You know, it's like Stephen King's kind of interesting because, you know, he's obviously, whether you want to call him the best horror novelist
Hold up.
of our, you know, time, I mean, you can't argue that he's probably the most prolific. But with that in mind, like, he's written some non-horror works that are actually, like my personal favorite Stephen King horror novel would be Pet Sematary, but 100 times over, I would rather read The Body over Pet Sematary. The Body is the novella of what was eventually developed into the movie Stand By Me, which is just this coming-of-age story about 4 boys who are looking for a dead body just so they can say that they found it before some other kids.
And then you have his 4 Richard Bachman books, which are my personal favorites. My personal favorite being Rage. But that one's technically out of print, so I don't technically have it, even though I do. Well, Rage is about someone who decides to shoot up a school. So, lovely content.
Yeah, that's pretty serious.
Yeah, you think, but you know, it's a novel he wrote.
But like, it really is kind of interesting though, because like, if Stephen King was just like, I'm done with, you know, all these like spooky, you know, backwoods Maine stories. I'm gonna write about, you know, some like woman falling in love with this Italian model, hottie, and they're gonna go on a cruise around the Mediterranean. Like, everyone would be up in arms. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
So, no, I also think that's an interesting point. Like, too, like whether you're established in a genre or, because like with Stephen King, like his non-horror works, a lot of it's like it's either kind of like sci-fi or mystery to a degree, or it's based on like his own like coming of age experiences. If you're an author who just writes like all over the wall type, you know, you can jump from being, you know, horror to romance to blank because you're not established in one particular genre. I think you would have a far easier time doing so.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. Now, getting back to one of the reasons why we were on here, back to Kirky's writing, do you what would you consider this genre of writing? Because honestly, you could go in any direction at this point. So, what are you really going for, if you mind me asking?
Ultimately, some degree of thriller, but not, you know, hardcore, you know, there's a man hunting you down type of thriller. Not even so much psychological, but more looking at things from the whole.
Alright.
That's an interesting kind of concept, like genre.
It's honestly, it's hard to give an answer because I haven't really fleshed it out, besides a few particular plot points here and there. I think it's really difficult to like see how it would develop until it actually does develop.
Gotcha.
So, I did have one other question for you there on your writing well. kind of two, but they go together.
Mm-hmm.
So I forget what song it was, but I was wondering why it was that you chose the song that came on the radio that came on. Like what?
Oh,
what
the Million Parts Between Us one?
Yeah.
Okay, so there actually is a reason for that. One, because I thought it just kind of fit with like what I was going for. Just like, but the actual song, it's a song called "Cooking No More" by the band Duster. It's a demo to their song "Cooking." It's actually very different from like published, full-fleshed version of the song that was released on a studio album. But it's like a very sad, slow type of song, and I was listening to it a lot, like when I was actually writing this initially a year ago. So that's where it comes from.
Okay, isn't it just so like interesting and awesome how music can move us to even our writing in a particular way?
Honestly, I would say like most of my writing to a degree is from music. Just thinking about particular lyrics or whatever. Like when we had the OG Flash Fiction show running over the airwaves back in the good old days, I appeared on it and I did this one thing that I had been working on since I was like a younger teenager called Wisconsin. And the whole idea of that came from the song by Deanna Carter's Strawberry Wine. So, I mean, like...
Basically what Kirky is saying is his personality is music.
To a degree. Actually, not even to a degree. I think I think my personality is based off of music.
It be like that.
Not the only
It
one.
do be like that.
Also, just since Kirky brought it up, for those of you who might be listening to us for the first time, when he talks about the radio, Flash Fiction used to play on the 91.3 FM WBMY at the Buffalo State College. Just figured I'd plug in where we came from.
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah, that's probably for the best. Thank you.
And Kirky now is the program director up there, right?
That is true.
Yeah, so I want to...
For better or worse.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll do great.
Alright, I don't know. Anything else? Anyone else got any questions? Pat, Aaron, Shawn, Brandon?
Well, thank you, Kirky, for sharing your awesome story with us. It was definitely awesome. Can't wait to see if we have any updates or if you'll come back with more.
Thank you.
And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like, yes, thank you for volunteering as our first guest.
I'm honored to honestly hear. Like, it's just like with the boys. It's just it honestly means a lot to be like selected as the first one, and like this is like for those listening, this is our second iteration because last week we had some glaring technical difficulties. But we've worked through them, and here we are, and like we've got like a podcast off the ground. So that's like absolutely awesome, and I'm just really happy to be able to share, talk with you all, and it means a lot. And I'm glad that Flash Fiction is like a phoenix rising from the ashes, still continuing.
Yeah.
With that though, also I would just like to also thank you, Kirk. It's always nice to hear what you have written, and it's always a breath of fresh air.
Oh, well, thank you.
Of course. And for the listeners, if you're listening to this, feel free to throw a like and follow us.
Yep, and if you want to submit anything, you can submit it at flashfiction913 at gmail.com.